The number of unemployed youth in South Africa continues to rise, with the unemployment rate between the age groups of 15 to 34 sitting at 45.5%. There are now concerns that the crisis could lead the youth towards forming an uprising movement in the country. For more insights, I'm joined by Dr. Meyer, who is the director of the Independent Institute of Education at Rosebank College. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us and for being with us this evening. Certainly a very concerning issue with regards to unemployment among young people. We saw earlier this week young people from Soweto, just under 300 of them, marching to the Joburg Mayor's office to hand over CVs. And amongst them were lawyers and people who had gotten a higher level of education. How dire is the situation amongst young people in terms of them not finding employment?
It's a very dire situation, and we must see that the investment that we make into the youth of South Africa, that education is a key driver to secure employment. But over and above that, really the issue around people getting experience in the workplace becomes critically important for them to be able to secure jobs. So how vast is the problem? If we look at more than half of our youth being unemployed, it is really a significant problem. The number that we get from Stats SA is obviously not the extended unemployment rate, the people that are despondent. These are just people that are in the cycle of being unemployed. So if we look at 45%, it is very discouraging because it's obviously looks to the number that we have for the rest of South Africa, which is not great at 33.5%. But certainly when we look at our youth, they need to have a future. And when they look at these numbers, they become despondent. And when people lose hope, that is when we see things like the Arab Spring that took place. Because people really don't see a future for themselves in South Africa. And the more we invest in their education, and it's very difficult for graduates that are unemployed, because as you said, there are lawyers, there are medical doctors, there are nurses, skills that are in dire needs in our country. But because of budget constraints by government and a fiscal policy that is not business, doesn't allow for business growth and foreign direct investment at the scales that we need for economic growth to absorb these jobs into the South African economy.
So, Doctor, you make mention of the investment that we should make in education. Is there a clear correlation between the high unemployment rate and just the current approach to learning at basic education level?
Well, certainly we need to look at the global benchmark assessments that we have, and we fare very poorly in maths and science. We really do not do well. Out of approximately 150 countries, we're faring in the lowest 20 countries. So we need to invest in basic education, you're quite right, because functional literacy, our students coming out with quality education at a basic education level and secondary education is critical. Because we also see that students get high marks. We're so focused on getting high matric pass rates, so driven by it. But the quality behind that, we are not investing enough time to ensure that our graduates from grade 12 actually have the skills and competencies to advance in the fields that they want to study. And this is why when students get to university, we see a high dropout rate. We see students that have had 97% for maths failing their maths courses in university because they are not adequately equipped, not just with the academic knowledge, but the life skills for this next step in their life that they need to take. And certainly the correlation and the investment speaks for itself in terms of the positive employment once somebody attains a degree.
And still speaking or continuing on that thought, Doc, the labour market dynamics in South Africa report for 2022 shows that those with a higher level of education are more likely to get employment opportunities as opposed to someone who's got a matric or anything lower than that. But we know that annually, the numbers of matrics leaving school far outweighs the number of people or the available placements within tertiary institutions. What alternatives does this large missing number then have in terms of upskilling themselves and finding those opportunities of employment?
Well, the first thing is the way that we spend our money. So the Department of Higher Education and Training obviously gets a budget, and the bulk of the budget for the university branch goes to NSFAS students. Now, NSFAS is a wonderful initiative. It really has done a large amount for us to transform the higher education sector, and also that there are graduates, previously disadvantaged graduates, that are now coming into the marketplace that are qualified. And the numbers speak for themselves, because if we look, it always varies between 10 and 15%, but individuals with degrees have a much better opportunity to get employment. And once they've had 2 years of work experience, that, you know, it's very, they might be unemployed in particular cycles, but largely the labor market absorbs them. For individuals with only a grade 12, you know, 34% of them are sitting as unemployed individuals. And when we look at people below grade 12, this is obviously when the numbers significantly impact. The lower the education, the lower and more menial jobs or general worker jobs these individuals then have to occupy. And it's not that we don't have qualified people in our country. It's the mismatch with the skills that we require and the experience that we require for particular jobs. And we don't have a coherent system to navigate this so that we have individuals that are workplace ready and can be absorbed by the corporate environment and into government positions.
So what collaborative efforts then could there be, Doc, between government and those corporate companies that would be able to come in and say, these are the skills that we need, and this is how you should be teaching them to get them ready for the jobs of the future?
So we've got sector education and training authorities, and more must be done around the skills planning by sector. So we mustn't have this blanket approach to saying this is how we're going to deal with things. We need to take, for example, the medical sector. We've got a dire need of nurses, and a lot of our nurses are leaving the country because of the regulatory framework that is so strict that it is prohibiting us from producing enough nurses. So the nurses aren't being absorbed because government doesn't have sufficient funds to pay their salaries in hospitals and clinics. But it doesn't mean that the economy doesn't need them. So how do we work with the private healthcare system so that we've got a collaborative effort in training these nurses and making sure that there's sufficient funding available through tax rebates, for example? We can see that the learnership projects that have run in our country, and there's a tax provision under the Income Tax Act, Section 12H, that has been really taken up by the corporate world, because there's a tax rebate when employers take on learners or put their currently employed staff on a learnership where they get experience and a qualification. The YES program is another huge program that has had significant impact in terms of giving people their first workplace opportunities. So this delineation by sector, making sure that we have the right incentives, the right economic environment so that we can bring people in, that we incentivize even while students are at university, when companies take them during their holiday breaks, that there's an incentive to pay, for example, these companies to pay a salary to these individuals so that they can get experience. By the time they graduate, that they have a significant amount of months experience already behind them that they can then apply and put on their CVs. So the national programs need to be more structured, need to be more focused by sector, need to be properly resourced, and we must look at the holistic investment that companies need to make and how we can incentivize them to make this really something that is attractive to them, and at the same time addressing our skills deficiencies that we have in the country.
Doc, the unemployment rate among young females is estimated at around 49.4% in 2024. What would you attribute this to in the number of females being much more significantly higher than that of males in those that are unemployed?
So we find that with females, that they generally have to stay home, they have to take care of child-minding activities. Also, if there are older adults in the house, it's expected that younger females care for them in the household, so older relatives, and also that they take care of children. So we'll see that older females might go off and work, and then the younger females are expected to then rear the children in the homes, look after elderly grandparents or other extended family members. And also when there is a choice for parents to invest in their children's education, we can see with NSFAS that we have about a 60-40% split. 60% females that participate in higher education, 40% males. But when it comes to the unemployment rate, this segment of individuals that may or may not have grade 12, that they, because of their obligations, their home care obligations, they are significantly disadvantaged because of the familial expectations from them, from their families and the broader community.
So, Doc, I mean, earlier on you mentioned a few hindrances within the system that contribute to these high levels of unemployment. You mentioned government budget cuts and also just that foreign direct investment that's not coming in at desirable rates or a scale that we'd want it to come into. We know that government should really be creating a conducive environment in order for businesses to flourish, for them to be able to create jobs. How much of an accountability should be put on the private sector in ensuring that those numbers are not only squarely put to them in terms of young people being employed, but more of those numbers are increasing in terms of the private sector hiring younger people?
There is a direct obligation on them, but we have to look holistically at the impediments why particular sectors are not growing. So are there statutory or professional bodies that are gatekeepers, that are prohibiting individuals from entering the market? Is the skills development and the education framing around that particular sector, is it conducive? Do we have trade and investment opportunities? Are we correlating those to what it is that we can do for our youth? So there really are a lot, there are a lot of things that the private sector should be doing, but we must do this hand in hand. So we're glad that the president is now reaching out to business and saying, how can we make these things work? But business, we must understand, it's not a they don't do things out of necessarily the goodness of their hearts. They've got a profit motive, we must understand that, but surely everybody has got a moral obligation, and all companies have a moral obligation to ensure that we do whatever we can to make sure that the people of South Africa are placed in decent jobs that are well paid. So really, the private sector must work collaboratively with government. And I think that if government shows this willingness and that we look at sectors holistically and not just cursory to say, the problem is A, B, C, D, but rather, how do we dissect the sector? How do we have a constructive plan around fixing a particular sector? Put all the role players and stakeholders in that, instead of this globular view where we always want to have national policies that are not focused to particular sectors and particular challenges that we are facing.
All right, Doctor, thank you so much for your time and for joining us this evening. Certainly that collaborative effort is needed between government and the private sector in ensuring that we've got more young people that are coming into the workplace.